a local couple's appearance on a popular reality show has convinced them of a harsh reality. Things aren't as rosy as they seem on TV. In this case, it's a home remodel on HGTV.
Out of absolutely nowhere, Drew Scott, one half of the beloved Property Brothers duo, has been hit by a wave of challenges that fans never saw coming. Is this truly happening? Word spreading across entertainment circles suggests that things have not been looking good for Drew Scott, for reasons that go far beyond what the polished television cameras ever showed. Fans who have followed him for years are now asking the kind of questions that nobody wants to answer out loud. What is really going on behind the scenes of the man who has spent over a decade helping other families build their dream homes? Is he still okay? Well, make sure you stay right here till the very end, because by the end of this video, we'll be unveiling the true story, the untold struggles, and a surprising look at what the future might actually hold for Drew Scott. Ready? Let's find out together. The difficult road before Property Brothers fame. When fans see Drew Scott on their screens today, they see a polished, successful television personality with a reported net worth of $100 million, a beautiful family, and a thriving entertainment empire built across more than a decade of HGTV dominance. What those same fans rarely stop to think about is just how close Drew Scott came to never making it at all. Because long before the cameras rolled on Property Brothers, Drew Scott was drowning in debt, watching his dreams fall apart, and wondering if he had made the worst decisions of his life. The road from there to here involved failures, hard pivots, and the kind of setbacks that break most people before they ever get a second chance. Drew Scott was born on April 28, 1978, in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. He grew up alongside his identical twin brother, Jonathan, and their older brother, James Daniel, known to most as JD, on a cattle ranch in Alberta. From an early age, Drew was drawn to performance and entertainment. He got involved in theater, improv, and sketch comedy, and that passion never left him. Real estate became something of a practical backup, a way to keep the lights on while he chased something bigger. For Drew, the bigger dream was acting. He moved to Vancouver specifically to pursue it, throwing himself into the process with everything he had. He enrolled in acting courses, went to networking events, took every audition he could find, and did everything an aspiring actor is supposed to do to get noticed. His earlier television appearances had included small roles in productions like Smallville, Breaker High, and Madison, and those glimpses of on-screen success were enough to convince him that pushing harder would eventually pay off. On the surface, it seemed like a plan. But underneath that plan, the debts were quietly piling up in a way he did not fully see coming. By the time it became clear that the acting career was not going to pan out the way he had hoped, Drew Scott had accumulated $100,000 in personal debt. That is not a small number for anyone, let alone for someone who did not have a major income to fall back on. Speaking to People magazine, Drew would later describe that period with unusual candor. He confirmed that he had racked up that significant debt while pursuing the acting dream in Vancouver, doing all the networking and coursework he believed would help him break through. The situation with his brother Jonathan was just as bad, if not worse. Jonathan had poured everything into a magic career, investing in props, a custom-made trailer, and leased equipment. He had trusted the wrong person during a business negotiation, a man who approached him about renting several of his illusions. After negotiations concluded, that person stole the entire production, effectively destroying the show and leaving Jonathan around $80,000 in debt. Even after Jonathan pursued a lawsuit and won, he was unable to collect what he was owed. Jonathan eventually filed for bankruptcy, a decision he has said he regrets to this day. According to information from Wikipedia's profile on Jonathan Scott, the bankruptcy was followed by serious depression. Drew watched all of that happen to his twin brother while managing his own financial disaster at the same time. What happened next is the part that most people know. The brothers came back together, leaned on their real estate knowledge, and slowly began flipping houses while working a string of jobs that included working as a busboy, a mall security guard, a flight attendant, a store manager, and a website designer. They spent 15 years renovating and selling properties before a television opportunity finally changed everything. Drew had begun pitching shows with real estate themes and was eventually offered a hosting role for a show called Realtor Idol, based on the American Idol format. That show never materialized, but it led to conversations that eventually produced the pilot for Property Brothers. When producers learned that Drew had a brother who was also in real estate, they built an entire show around the pair. Multiple North American networks turned the show down before it was picked up by the W Network in Canada and later distributed by HGTV. According to Drew himself, the acting failure that cost him $100,000 ended up being exactly what got him on television in the first place. All those years of acting courses and networking created a performance quality that made him naturally watchable on camera. The show premiered on HGT5 in 2011. And by any measure, everything that came after was a massive success. But success does not erase everything that came before it. And for Drew Scott, the patterns of challenge and pressure that defined his early life did not simply disappear once the cameras found him. They just took new forms. Some of those new forms would prove harder to deal with than $100,000 in debt ever was. And that is what makes the next part of this story so important to understand. Because what followed the fame was a different kind of pressure entirely. And the details are ones that most viewers never heard about. Keep watching, because what happened next only gets more complicated. When fans took Drew Scott to court. For more than a decade, Property Brothers carried the reputation of being one of HGTV's cleanest and most wholesome shows. Drew and Jonathan Scott presented themselves as trustworthy guides who genuinely cared about helping families get into the homes of their dreams. HGTV itself described the twins as the cable equivalent of box office movie stars, a phrase that the network's then-president Kathleen Finch used to express just how central the brothers had become to the channel's identity. That reputation, carefully built over hundreds of episodes and multiple spin-off series, was put in serious jeopardy when a Las Vegas couple decided to take legal action over what they described as one of the worst experiences of their lives. The story begins in 2018, when newlyweds Paul and Mindy King came across a casting notice for Property Brothers. The Kings applied, went through the audition process, and were selected for the show. Excited about what they thought would be a dream renovation, they wired $192,000 to Cineflix, the production company that was working with the Scott brothers and HGTV at the time. They skipped their honeymoon in order to make this financial commitment. Mindy King later described the weight of that sacrifice clearly, saying that they gave up their honeymoon, she gave up her wedding band, and they used their savings because they trusted Jonathan and Drew. The episode, titled Gambles and Jackpots, aired in July of 2019. On television, the renovation looked like another successful Property Brothers transformation. In real life, what the Kings discovered behind the walls and under the surfaces of their home was something entirely different. The sewer was leaking sludge directly into the kitchen area. The island bar sink fell in. Their outdoor stove was fitted with the wrong-sized pipe and gas line. The dishwasher and kitchen sink plumbing had failed, causing mold and residue to form inside the dishwasher. Wires had been left exposed. Doors were not hung correctly. Kitchen cabinets were warped and poorly painted. Grout had been applied in locations where it should never have been used. According to reporting from multiple news outlets, including local Las Vegas station KLAS and News 3LV, the Kings filed a lawsuit in Clark County District Court in January of 2021 against Cineflix and several contractors and subcontractors. The lawsuit alleged that Cineflix was not even licensed in the state of Nevada to perform construction work when the renovation was carried out. The contractor brought in for the job, Villa Construction, had no expertise in home renovation, and the King's property was reportedly the first renovation that company had ever attempted as a general contractor. The consequences of those decisions were serious. By the time the lawsuit was gaining public attention in May of 2024, the King's home had been placed on a classification that reflected its hazardous condition. Mindy King described the situation in terms that left little to the imagination. She told reporters that their lives were on hold, that they were living in what she called hell, that they could not use the kitchen, could not safely use significant portions of the home, and that they were in constant fear about their safety. The Kings have not listed Jonathan and Drew Scott as defendants, but the couple told KLAS they were considering adding the brothers to the legal action. In a statement to KLAS, the King's lawyer said the case served as a stark reminder that the televised world of construction often masks the unfiltered reality of what truly transpires behind the scenes. A jury trial was scheduled for October of 2024. The King case also came at the same moment that a separate legal matter involving Cineflix was gaining attention. The production company had been hit with a $2.5 million settlement in a class action lawsuit brought by CWA Canada and the International Alliance of Theatrical Stage Employees over unpaid work and poor conditions for freelance and reality television workers. That case had been filed back in 2018. For Drew Scott specifically, the reputational dimension of the King lawsuit was significant. Property Brothers had always marketed itself on the idea that what viewers saw on screen reflected what actually happened in the homes being renovated. The lawsuit directly challenged that idea. The lawyer representing the Kings put it plainly in a public statement, saying that the case was a reminder that the televised world of construction often masks the unfiltered reality of what truly transpires behind the scenes. Drew Scott has spent years building a personal brand around honesty, humor, and genuine care for the families he works with. Watching that brand face this kind of scrutiny, even through a production company he no longer worked with, was not a small thing. The case illustrated a vulnerability that anyone in the television renovation business faces. When things go wrong on set or with contractors, the face of the show is often the face that the public associates with the problem. But the lawsuit was not even the hardest thing Drew Scott had to face during this period. What came next had nothing to do with business or television. It had to do with something far more personal, something that no amount of success or fame could prepare a person for. And that is what we are going to talk about right now. The personal battles that broke through the cameras. Television personalities live two lives simultaneously. There is the life that appears on screen, where everything tends to resolve itself within a given episode, and the host always ends the hour with a smile. And then there is the actual life, the one happening away from the cameras, where things do not always resolve cleanly, and where the challenges can stretch across years without resolution. For Drew Scott, the gap between those two lives has been wider than most fans ever realized. One of the most deeply personal struggles Drew Scott has ever faced came in the form of his and his wife Linda Phan's battle with infertility. Drew and Linda married in May of 2018 after 8 years together. Their wedding was a celebrated moment for fans of the show, and HGTV even produced a series called Drew and Linda Say I Do, which covered the festivities surrounding their Italian ceremony. By all appearances, the next obvious chapter was starting a family. That chapter turned out to be one of the hardest they had ever written together. Linda Phan was diagnosed with Graves' disease, an autoimmune condition that affects the thyroid gland and can seriously interfere with fertility. Drew described the early years of trying to conceive as deeply disorienting. In an interview with People magazine, he said that once they started to understand why things were not working, they discovered that Linda's thyroid issues and Graves' disease meant they had to first figure out how to get her body to a point where conception was even possible. That process alone was the biggest challenge before they could even think seriously about getting pregnant. The couple spent approximately 2 years going through fertility treatments, including both IUI and IVF procedures. In a joint essay published in Reveal magazine, Drew and Linda described what that period felt like from the inside. They wrote that the experience was still kind of blurry, that it felt like a time warp, like living the same month on repeat, going through doctor appointments, medications, tests, blood work, and pep talks, always hoping for the best. Linda Phan later told the magazine that during that stretch, she often felt anxious and sad, wondering if they had waited too long, feeling regret about not planning earlier, and thinking she should have considered whether having children would even be easy. That kind of emotional weight is not something that disappears when filming resumes. Drew Scott was continuing to host Property Brothers, to appear in interviews, to maintain the upbeat presence his audience expected, while privately going through one of the most emotionally exhausting experiences a couple can face. The public had no idea how much was happening behind the scenes. The story eventually reached a joyful moment. In December of 2021, Drew and Linda announced they were expecting their first child. Their son, Parker James Scott, was born on May 4th of 2022, which also happened to be the couple's fourth wedding anniversary. Drew's Instagram post announcing Parker's arrival was celebrated by fans around the world. But the path to that moment had been anything but easy. In June of 2024, Drew and Linda welcomed their second child, a daughter they named Piper Ray. Their second pregnancy arrived in an entirely different way from the first. After Parker was born, the couple had just begun discussing returning to their fertility endocrinologist when Linda suddenly began feeling what Drew described as signs she could not quite explain. She took 4 pregnancy tests, all of which came back positive. Drew described learning about the natural second pregnancy as mind-blowing, particularly after being told for years that IVF was essentially their only realistic path to having children. There were other personal challenges that affected the wider Scott family during this period. Their older brother, J.D. Scott, spent more than a year battling a mystery illness that began in 2018. He described feeling like he was dying at the time, dealing with a brain fog that would set in at unpredictable moments. He was eventually diagnosed with acute mercury poisoning. J.D. later recovered, but the experience was frightening for the entire family and drew real concern from fans who had come to know him through his occasional appearances on the show. Drew Scott also dealt with a physical setback during this era that, while not life-threatening, highlighted how much the demands of television production and other projects were placing on him physically. In September of 2017, while competing on Dancing with the Stars alongside professional partner Emma Slater, Drew suffered a serious hamstring injury during rehearsal. He described feeling what seemed like a knot popping in his hamstring and hearing what felt like a snap. He was unable to bend his leg or put weight on it in the hours following the injury. Despite all of that, he performed the next night anyway, determined not to withdraw from the competition. That decision, to push through physical pain because the show demanded it, said something larger about the kind of pressure Drew Scott has consistently operated under. The schedule of producing and hosting multiple series simultaneously while managing a production company, pursuing personal milestones, and maintaining a public profile is not the relaxed life that home renovation television sometimes implies. The juggling act is constant, and the demands that television places on someone in Drew Scott's position do not pause for injury, grief, or the emotional toll of fertility treatments. Whether that pace is sustainable long-term is a question that anybody watching closely would reasonably ask. And while all of this was happening personally and professionally, a different kind of challenge was emerging that had to do with Drew's public image specifically, something that struck directly at who people believed him to be. It's an angle that almost nobody has talked about honestly. Stay with me, because what comes next reveals a side of this story that changes the whole picture. Where Drew Scott stands today and what comes next. Given everything that has happened around Drew Scott over the years, from financial ruin before fame, to legal clouds hanging over the show's legacy, to deeply personal struggles playing out away from the cameras, the natural question becomes, where does he actually stand today? And what does the road ahead look like? The answer is more complicated than a simple success story, but it is also more hopeful than the word trouble might suggest. From a professional standpoint, Drew Scott and his brother Jonathan remain among HGTV's most recognizable and commercially active personalities. Their production company, Scott Brothers Entertainment, which they founded in 2010, has grown significantly over the years into a full media entity that creates content for North American and international broadcasters. The company has produced not just their own shows, but content for other clients as well. The Property Brothers franchise has expanded well beyond the original series that debuted on HGTV in 2011. By the time Property Brothers concluded its original format, it had generated multiple spin-offs, including Property Brothers, Buying and Selling, Brother vs. Brother, Property Brothers, Forever Home, Celebrity IOU, Backed by the Bros, and Don't Hate Your House with the Property Brothers, which premiered in November of 2024 and showcased a raw, more behind-the-scenes look at what home renovations actually involve. In February of 2025, HGTV announced that Drew and Jonathan would star in a brand new series called Chasing the West, an 8-episode show that drew on their actual upbringing on a cattle ranch in Alberta, Canada. The series followed families who wanted to leave city life behind and embrace ranch living, covering everything from adapting to a slower pace and tending livestock to growing produce. The show premiered in summer of 2025 across HGTV, Max, and Discovery+. Then, in October of 2025, HGTV and Scott Brothers Entertainment announced yet another new series called Property Brothers Under Pressure. The 14-episode show was described as inspired directly by fan feedback, following Drew and Jonathan as they guided buyers through the emotional and financial pressures of the current housing market, from navigating fierce competition and budget shock to making smart renovation decisions. Under Pressure premiered on HGTV on March 15th of 2026, with episodes also streaming the following day on Max and Discovery+. But not everyone in the audience greeted the announcement of Property Brothers Under Pressure with celebration. When HGTV made the news public, a segment of fans pushed back in the comments, pointing out that the network had canceled other beloved shows while continuing to greenlight more content for the Scott brothers. Bargain Block, which had run for 5 seasons before being canceled in 2025, was mentioned multiple times by disappointed fans. Other canceled shows, including Married to Real Estate, Farmhouse Fixer, and Izzy, were also brought up in the conversation. The frustration was directed less at Drew and Jonathan personally, and more at a network pattern that some viewers felt favored a small number of established names over a wider variety of shows. That kind of public ambivalence is a new kind of challenge for Drew Scott, and it is worth taking seriously. For most of the run of Property Brothers, the brothers operated in an environment where almost all audience sentiment was strongly positive. Being questioned or criticized, even indirectly, as a symbol of a network's programming decisions represents a shift in how some portions of the audience relate to the brand. On a personal level, Drew Scott has been more candid in recent years about the realities of his life that fans do not usually see. In 2023, he spoke to People magazine about adjusting to fatherhood, acknowledging that his early months as a parent were affected by the fact that he returned to school to finish an executive MBA just 2 months after Parker was born, requiring him to fly to Boston for 2 weeks, while Linda managed everything alone. He described that period as something that helped him understand how easy it would be to let Linda take all the parenting responsibility while he stayed focused on work, and he credited honest communication with Linda as what kept him from falling into that pattern. In 2025, Drew Scott also made a candid admission in an interview with Andy Cohen that shed light on another kind of pressure that long-running television personalities face. Drew revealed that HGTV had been asking him to keep dyeing his hair darker because the network, in his words, was not ready for him to look older yet. He explained that he had been dyeing his hair every 3 weeks and had even grown a large gray beard before dyeing it just before returning for press appearances. Jonathan made a similar admission, saying he had started going gray before Drew did and was personally fine with the silver look, but that the network had always pushed back against it. That small detail pointed to a larger truth about the image demands that television places on its longest-running personalities, expectations that can quietly grind against the reality of how those individuals actually look and feel as the years pass. There is also the ongoing reality that the housing market Drew and Jonathan spend their professional lives navigating has become genuinely difficult for ordinary buyers. Drew himself addressed this directly in an interview with Collider in connection with Property Brothers Under Pressure in March of 2026. He described the current moment as unprecedented, saying that in the modern history of homes, there has never been a time when it was this unaffordable for first-time buyers or for buyers in general. The show's premise of helping families navigate that pressure is a natural response to reality, but it also puts Drew Scott squarely in the middle of a conversation about housing affordability that has no easy answers and no quick renovation fix. Every family he helps on screen represents a market condition that thousands of families off-screen are also living through without any television crew to guide them. A television personality whose entire brand is built around helping people buy and fix homes is in a complicated position when the housing market makes that process nearly impossible for the people he is supposed to be helping. The show, under the title Under Pressure, is an acknowledgement of that tension. But the tension itself does not disappear because a series addresses it on screen. The families that Drew and Jonathan work with on television are real people, living in a real market, facing real financial barriers that no renovation budget can fully solve. There is also the continuing shadow of the King lawsuit, which raised questions that have never been fully answered for the public. The legal fight was between the Kings and Cineflix, not Drew Scott directly, but the association exists, and the image of a Las Vegas couple describing their home as uninhabitable years after a Property Brothers renovation is an image that does not simply fade from public memory, because legal proceedings concluded quietly. What Drew Scott has consistently demonstrated across all of these challenges is a capacity to keep moving. He kept performing on Dancing with the Stars with a hamstring injury that left him unable to put weight on his leg. He kept hosting and producing shows through years of fertility treatment and personal heartbreak. He kept building new shows and new ventures, even as legal clouds gathered around the production company that once worked with his brand. He and Jonathan also released a memoir in 2017 titled It Takes Two, Our Story, in which they addressed all the lows alongside the highs, including the bankruptcy, the debt, and the emotional weight of failing before succeeding. That kind of public honesty about failure, at the height of their fame, was not something many television personalities choose to do. The brothers have also built out a home furnishings line called Scott Living, which extends the Property Brothers brand into the retail space and gives Drew and Jonathan a commercial presence that does not depend entirely on what HGTV commissions in any given year. Scott Brothers Entertainment has continued to grow as a production company with projects beyond their own on-screen work, creating content for other broadcasters and platforms. That diversification is the kind of structural protection that makes Drew Scott's professional position more resilient than it might appear when the challenges are listed one by one. Whether that resilience becomes the defining narrative of his story, or whether the accumulating weight of these challenges eventually changes the trajectory of his career, is something that only time will answer. For now, Drew Scott is still very much a presence on HGTV, still co-leading a growing media company, still building a family, and still navigating the particular kind of public life that comes with being one of cable television's most recognizable faces. The problems he has faced are real, and they are serious, but they have not stopped the machine. And that, in itself, is the complicated truth about where Drew Scott actually stands. With this, we have come to the end of this video. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, do well to like, comment, and subscribe for more content. To enjoy more thrilling stories, click now on the following video that pops up on your screen.